In the wilds of Texas, where a man's reputation was carved by the horses he broke, a 72-year-old ghost from the past stepped out of the dust. Laughter erupted across Mustang Hollow Ranch at the sight of him, skinny, limping, and with eyes sharp as rusted blades. But then, something no one expected happened. The fiercest Mustang bowed its head to him, as if greeting a long-banished king who had finally returned. Late July in the Texas Panhandle was a scorching hell, red dirt, relentless wind, and prairie grass trembling beneath a 108-degree sun. In this place, where people said only cattle and dust storms could survive, lay a patch of land called Mustang Hollow, a ranch as old as the region itself, once home to legendary war horses that roamed during a time now lost. But that legacy was cracking. Jesus, Caleb Morgan muttered as he pulled his father Rhett from a shattered fence post. The man's cowboy hat had been knocked clean off, blood dripping from his temple to his jaw. The middle-aged ranch manager had just been thrown by the newly auctioned Mustang, a pure-blooded wild stallion with fire in its eyes and the walk of a stalking panther. "That thing ain't no horse," Rhett hissed from the dirt, cradling his ribs. "It's hell in a hide." On the main house porch, Bo Carter said nothing. His arms folded, the sun had scorched the white shirt on his shoulders into a dirty tan, but his eyes weren't on the horse, nor on the man writhing in pain. They were fixed on something deeper, the pride rotting in the stares of the ranch hands murmuring around the corral. 3 men injured, 2 needed over a dozen stitches. The cold voice came from behind Bo. Dr. Willis, the ranch's long-serving veterinarian, stepped up. "If you care about Mustang Hollow's name, then either put that horse down or—" "Oi?" Bo asked without turning, "or bring the old man back." The air seemed to freeze for a moment. A few faces went pale, others tensed. Only Caleb's eyes lit up, wide with hope. "You mean Wes Turner?" Caleb blurted out, as if unlocking a long-buried secret. Dr. Willis didn't answer. He simply looked at Bo, and after a moment's silence, the ranch owner slowly nodded. "Call him," Bo said, then looked to Caleb. "But let the boy do it, and tell Wes." He paused, eyes narrowing against the golden light falling across the corral, where the black Mustang stood alone, proud and defiant, like a fire about to explode. "Tell him I'm holding something he left behind 30 years ago." Far north in Colorado, nestled at the foot of the San Juan Mountains, Wesley Turner was splitting wood. Each chop was deliberate and firm, as if the 72-year-old body wielding the axe had never weakened. Wind threaded through the treetops, lifting strands of white hair from his brow. On the front porch, an old hunting dog yawned and cracked one eye open as the phone rang inside the cabin. Wes picked it up slowly without haste. "No, we don't need insurance, and we're full on salvation," he said gruffly, his voice bearing the gravel of a life spent half in the saddle. "It's me, Caleb Morgan, Uncle Wes. I need you to come back to Texas." A long silence stretched across the line. Caleb held his breath. "I figured you were dead," Wes replied at last, voice dry, flat. "That horse, you once told me, some spirits can't be broken, they can only be understood. This horse, he's one of those." "Whose ranch?" Wes asked. "Bo Carter's." Another pause. "He said he's got something you left behind." The wind howled faintly over the line. Then, click, Wes hung up. 3 days later, a solitary figure emerged from the red haze at the far end of the long dirt road into Mustang Hollow. The wind stirred in gusts, tugging at the brim of a sun-bleached hat atop an old man leading a plain brown horse, its back slightly bowed, its saddle cracked, with nothing but a small leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "I'll be damned," Rhett muttered, shading his eyes. "Turner actually came back?" Bo Carter didn't answer. He stood on the porch in silence, watching every step the man took. A legend, once exiled like a criminal. The entire ranch fell still. Hammers halted. Laughter died mid-sentence. Workers exchanged uneasy glances. One quietly loosened the whip from his belt, just in case. Caleb stood taller than ever. Wes stopped about 10 paces from the fence, eyes scanning the gathered faces, and then they locked on the black stallion in the corral. The beast stood there, chest heaving, bloodshot eyes gleaming, its mane flaring like a wildfire. "What's his name?" Wes asked, addressing no one in particular. "Midnight," Caleb replied. "You shouldn't name a horse before you understand it," Wes said quietly, turning toward Bo. "You called me back. So what is it you're holding?" Bo didn't respond right away. He stepped down from the porch and stood directly in front of Wes, barely an arm's length away. "Not a horse," Bo said. "A truth you've never heard, and it's time you did." Wes closed his eyes for a brief moment. The wind caught his old canvas coat, as if lifting the weight of a past scorched by anger and betrayal. "Then let me do my job first," he said softly, and turned toward the corral where the Mustang waited and where the past stirred, watching. Everyone at the ranch watched in silence, as if witnessing a ghost step out of the dust, or perhaps a piece of themselves returning. No one said it aloud, but the moment Wes Turner stepped through the gates of Mustang Hollow, the air changed. The wind still kicked up dust ribbons along the dirt road, but folks stopped cursing when it got in their eyes. Around the stables, the ranch hands moved slower, spoke softer, more carefully. Even Rhett Morgan, the hot-headed foreman who usually cracked his whip against the fence posts each morning, had grown strangely quiet. Only Caleb, eyes wide with excitement and a grin that wouldn't quit, dared to walk close to Wes, as if he were greeting an old friend who'd never left. That morning, before the sun had fully crested the west barns, Wes Turner was already outside the corral. In his hands, an old faded rope. No whip, no bridle, no leather gloves like the young domidors always carried. He wore a sun-bleached denim shirt, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the black stallion circling inside the pen. Midnight, a name that sounded more like a scar than a label. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked, standing near the gate, shielding his eyes from the rising light. "That horse nearly broke my dad's neck last week." Wes gave a subtle nod but said nothing. He stepped toward the corral gate, eyes locked on the creature pawing at the dirt. Red appeared near the tack shed, his white t-shirt soaked with sweat, a stained coffee mug in hand. He approached with a smirk, curling his lip. "You planning to have a chat with it, Mr. Turner?" Wes turned toward him, a glint of something unreadable in his gaze. "Maybe. You planning to listen?" Rhett snorted and spat into the dust. "I've got no time for circus tricks." "I don't perform," Wes replied calmly. "I work." He placed a hand on the latch. Outside the fence, all chatter faded. Bo Carter stepped out from the main house, hands tucked in the pockets of his slacks, eyes steady. He stood on the porch, silent, unreadable, a man weighing past sins against present disbelief. "Your nephew believes you'll pull it off," Bo murmured to Dr. Willis, who stood beside him. "I'm not so sure." Wes opened the gate. The hinges creaked, screeching like the clash of two eras, one of youth and fury now past, the other, scorned, discarded, demanding to be heard. Midnight let out a shrill scream, spun, and charged the man stepping into its territory. Its eyes were bloodshot, hooves pounding furiously into the dirt. One blow could shatter bones, but Wes didn't move. He stood still, his hand slightly raised, no words, no flinch. Midnight halted, 3 steps away. It panted, ribcage rising and falling, eyes glinting like blades. Its body quivered like a wire stretched to its limit. Wes took a step forward, then another. At the third, he stopped and slowly removed his outer jacket, revealing a weathered arm darkened by sun and age. Across his left forearm, a scorched scar in the shape of a T ran from elbow to wrist, like a black snake seared into flesh. The ranch hands outside the corral began murmuring. Caleb stood frozen. Rhett squinted, furrowing his brow as he noticed the scar. "A thief," he muttered. "For thief." "Not everyone chooses what's burned into their skin," Wes said softly, not turning around. "But everyone can choose what they leave behind." Midnight suddenly lowered its head. It didn't back away, didn't roar. It bowed slowly as if realizing the man before him was no threat. Wes sat down, on the dirt, facing it, like an old friend waiting for a reply. By that afternoon, as sunlight bathed the fence rails in amber, a sight no one could have imagined unfolded. Wes Turner sat on a worn log in the corral, leaning against a post. Midnight stood beside him, silent, gentle, eyes half closed as if dozing. No rope, no saddle, just an old man and a soul once branded as untamable. Caleb stepped quietly into the pen. His hands trembled as he reached toward the horse. Midnight pinned its ears for a second, but didn't retreat. It sniffed the boy's outstretched hand, then leaned its head against Caleb's shoulder, like accepting kin. Wes smiled. The light cut through the rails, casting a halo across Midnight's mane. "His eyes don't know how to lie," Wes said. "And you're the first to believe what others laughed at." That evening, Bo Carter hosted a modest dinner on the porch. No wine, no guests, Just a simple Western meal, slow beans, cornbread, grilled meat, and cold tea. Wes arrived late. The scent of wood smoke from the outdoor pit stirred memories long buried. Teresa Carter stepped out in a dark velvet dress, her hair pinned high, her face still striking despite the years and the Texas wind. She stared at Wes without blinking. Her gaze held no blame, no thanks, just a silence too deep to measure. Caleb broke the quiet first. "You used to live here, didn't you?" Wes looked at the boy for a long moment and nodded. "Over 30 years ago. But I didn't leave because I wanted to." Bo set down his glass of tea, voice low. "You didn't return just for a horse turner." Wes didn't respond. He picked up his fork, took a bite of grilled meat, chewing slowly like biting into memory. Teresa lowered her chopsticks. Her hand pressed lightly against the table edge. "There are scars that don't live on skin, Wes," she said softly. "They live in those left behind." Wes sipped his tea. "I didn't leave anyone behind. I was forced out." Bo straightened in his chair. "Then it's time you heard the truth." Out on the porch, the wind began to rise. A white curtain flared like a weathered flag, signaling a battle long overdue. The next morning, dew still clung to the edges of prickly pear leaves along the northern fence line as Caleb stood by the corral with 2 warm slices of cornbread in his hand. He watched from a distance. Wes was sitting in the middle of the training ring, his back turned, as silent and unmoving as an old cottonwood tree. The black Mustang, Midnight, no longer snorted or stomped. It stood just 2 yards away, quiet, ears flicking, as if listening to a story older than words. "Brought breakfast," Caleb said softly, careful not to break the moment. Wes didn't turn. He simply extended a hand behind him. Caleb stepped closer and placed the bread in that weathered palm. "1 slice for the man, 1 for the horse," Wes said. "You know, some horses will only eat from the hands they trust." "Midnight doesn't seem to trust anyone," Caleb replied, eyes locked on the animal. "It used to," Wes said slowly. "But it was betrayed, like some people." Caleb swallowed hard. The words felt like wind blowing from deep underground. He looked again into Midnight's eyes, and for the first time he didn't see rage. He saw fear. The kind that comes from being forgotten, misjudged, boxed in as something unworthy of redemption. Wes rose to his feet, brushed dust from his knees. He looked Caleb straight in the eyes. "You ever get called something you didn't deserve?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Son of a nobody. Kid without a dad. The other boys called me No-Name Morgan." Wes stood quiet for a moment, then he turned toward Midnight. The horse blinked once. "Midnight doesn't know who its parents were either," Wes said gently. "Born in the wild, raised by wind and coyotes." He rested a hand on the rail, gaze distant. "But you know, a horse's eyes never lie. They don't know how to pretend. If you're patient enough to really look, they'll tell you an entire life story." That afternoon, Wes opened the corral gate and stepped inside with only a rough cotton towel slung over one shoulder. No whip, no stick. Once again, the entire ranch crowded around the fence, breath held tight as if waiting for a wreck. Rhett stood back, arms folded, a sneer creeping across his face. "It was just luck yesterday," he muttered to the saddle maker beside him. "That beast ain't tameable." But Wes didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the corral and sat down. Midnight stood further off, unmoving, eyes sharp. Then, quietly, Wes unbuttoned the left cuff of his shirt and rolled up his sleeve. Sunlight caught the scar, a burned-in T, still jagged, still angry after all these years. Whispers rose around the corral. "What is that? A brand, like the kind they use on stolen horses?" God almighty, was he a thief? Wes heard all of it, but he didn't explain. He simply said, "Some scars come from wounds, others from people. This one is both." Midnight took a step forward. Its ears tilted. Wes reached out, not trembling, not rushing. The horse moved closer, stopped just before him. "You want to trust me," Wes whispered, "but you're still not sure." Midnight bowed its head. Its muzzle touched his palm. No one could find words. Later that afternoon, Rhett slammed his hand against the fence rail as Wes walked Midnight out of the corral. The old man had his battered hat on again, eyes calm as a summer lake. The horse, once a nightmare, now walked beside him like a loyal dog. Caleb ran over, eyes wide with awe. "How did you do that?" Wes looked at him, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I didn't do anything. I stopped trying to force something out of it. I let it be who it is." Then he looked toward Bo, who stood watching from the porch. "I used to be a horse locked in the wrong pen." Bo didn't answer, but for a moment, Just one, his eyes misted. That evening, as Caleb passed by the main house to deliver a work report, he heard voices arguing behind the parlor doors. "You really gonna let him stay?" Rhett's voice sharp. "Yes," Bo replied, steady. "You forget he was run out of the Panhandle in disgrace?" "No, I remember it better than anyone." "Then why let him back into this house like none of it happened?" "Because some truths," Bo said, pausing, "can't stay buried forever." Caleb stood frozen in the hallway. His heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "You'll understand soon enough, Rhett." Caleb turned and walked away, quiet but stirred. He didn't know what the adults were hiding, but he knew one thing for sure. Wes Turner wasn't just a horseman. Something deeper, older, and more painful was rising from this soil. And midnight was only the beginning. That night, Wes sat in an old wooden chair outside the stable, watching the moon rise behind slender willows. Caleb joined him silently. "Uncle Wes," the boy said after a while, "when you look at midnight, it's like you've met him before, like in another life." Wes chuckled lightly. "Not another life, just a time you never saw. A time when breaking a horse meant listening to it, not whipping it." Caleb nodded, gazing at the stallion asleep on its feet inside the barn. "I think that horse knows everything going on around here." Wes was silent for a long moment, then said in a voice low and full of old wind, "You're right. But it can't speak with words. It can only give its eyes to those who know how to look." And from that moment forward, Midnight's eyes never lied again. The Texas night wind swept across the porch of the main house, carrying the scent of scorched grass and a chill from the open prairie. Wes Turner sat alone on an old wooden chair, fingers laced together in his lap, eyes fixed on the barn where Midnight stood, sleeping upright like a statue made of dusk. Behind him, a door creaked open. "You shouldn't sit out too long. It'll get cold," said Teresa's voice from behind, gentle but distant. Wes didn't turn. His gaze remained on the black stallion, now a mirror reflecting every ghost he'd ever carried. "You always did worry about small things," he murmured. Footsteps creaked softly across the wooden porch. Teresa stepped up beside him, a thin shawl trailing behind her in the breeze. "Sometimes, small things are all we have left to hold on to," she replied, her eyes following his. A heavy silence settled between them. Wes finally turned to her. "Did you keep the letter I left?" Teresa flinched slightly. She gripped the edge of her shawl, lips pressed thin. "I kept everything," she said softly, "even the things I shouldn't have." Wes sighed. "Then why didn't you tell me, Teresa? Why did you let me leave like a thief, like a traitor?" Her eyes shimmered under the golden porch light. She sat beside him. "Because I didn't have a choice. Bo's father, Old Man Carter, forced me to stay quiet. I was pregnant, Wes." The words fell like a stone into still water. Wes froze. "You had a child?" Teresa nodded. "When he found out about us, I was nearly 2 months along. He called me into his study and said if I didn't end things with you, he'd turn you into the sheriff. Said I'd lose everything, even the baby." Wes's hands clenched the armrests. "They burned me, Teresa. Branded me like a wild horse." His voice cracked. "I carried that scar for 30 years. Because I loved you. Because I trusted you." "Don't think I didn't bleed too," Teresa snapped, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I was forced to lie, to say the baby was Bo's. I've lived in this house like a stranger my whole life, while you were out there somewhere thinking I betrayed you." Wes stood suddenly, unable to sit any longer. "Then where's the child? Who is it?" Teresa looked up, her voice trembling. "It's Rhett." The wind stilled. Wes took a step back, his heart pounded like hooves on stone. "No, that's not possible," he whispered. "Rhett Morgan is my son?" Teresa nodded slowly. "He bears another man's name. He was raised calling someone else father. But he's your blood." Wes staggered back, bumping into a porch beam. He leaned on it, as if without it, he might collapse. "God, all these years I've watched him sneer at me, curse me, never knowing." Teresa rose, gently stepped toward him. "Rhett doesn't know, and I never had the courage to tell him." Wes turned away. "I've forgiven this world for a lot of things, Teresa, but this, I don't know how." Dinner that night was thick with quiet tension. Bill Carter sat at the head of the table, eyes distant beneath the flickering lights. Rhett sat to his left, eating mechanically. Caleb sat to his right, casting sideways glances at the silent storm between them. Wes sat at the far end, a shadow between the past and the present, Wes, Bo said, his voice low and grave, I know you've heard part of the truth. Wes raised his eyes. Only part? Bo sipped his tea. I knew Teresa was forced to marry me. I knew the child wasn't mine. Rhett froze. Silence gripped the table. What are you talking about? He demanded. You raised me. I'm your son. This can't be about him. His voice spat the last word with instinctive disgust. Wes didn't flinch. He only closed his eyes. You are my son, he said gently. I didn't know until today, but I see it in your eyes and how you stand in your anger. No. Rhett stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is a setup, some emotional con so he can steal back his name. I'm not the son of a branded man. Wes lifted his left arm. The scorched tea scar glowed under the chandelier like a curse and a truth carved into flesh. You think this brand makes me a thief? He asked. Or is it proof I was silenced by a lie that lasted 30 years? Rhett didn't answer. He stormed out, his boots pounding the hallway like whips cracking through the night. After dinner, Bo sat with Wes in the parlor. Teresa stood by the window, staring at the stables. I know you hate me, Bo began. Wes didn't respond. He was staring at an old black and white photo on the wall of a younger Bo, his father, and Wes himself, back when he was Mustang Hollow's lead horse trainer. That day, Bo continued, my father made you kneel, stripped your shirt, and branded you like a wild animal. I stood there, and I didn't stop it. Wes closed his eyes. I was 18. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the strength to go against him. Bo folded his hands in his lap. Now I'm not long for this world. Doctor says the tumor can't be removed. For the first time in their conversation, Wes looked at him. His gaze was no longer angry, just sorrowful. So you called me back? To die clean? Bo nodded. To let you know, to let Rhett know, and if there's time, to let the man we threw out like a dog walk out of here as the father of a son he never got to hold. Wes turned toward the darkened hallway where Rhett had disappeared. I didn't come here to father anyone, he said quietly. I came here for a horse, but maybe that horse knows more than I do. That night, Wes returned to the stables once more. Midnight was awake, standing in the shadows as if waiting. Wes didn't speak. He just sat down beside the post, gazing up at the stars. The sky was thick with them, like old memories scattered across the dark. You knew, didn't you? He murmured. You knew what it was like. To be blamed, branded, forgotten. Midnight stepped closer, its head nudging his shoulder. Wes smiled faintly. At least you don't carry your scars on the outside. That morning broke with a soft layer of mist floating above the Texas fields, where the young grass still held the wet breath of night. The sound of hoofbeats rose slowly from the direction of the main barn, where Caleb Morgan was leading Midnight out of the stable like it was part of some ancient ritual. The black Mustang, once the terror of Mustang Hollow, now walked gently, as if it had been born for nothing but companionship. Wes Turner stood farther off, leaning on the sun-bleached fence rails. His eyes, faded but alert, watched the scene with a quiet stirring underneath. You were right, Caleb called back, smiling. He didn't need conquering. You listened to him, instead of shouting over him, Wes replied, nodding. That's the first way a horse learns its own name. From the house porch, Rhett Morgan stood with arms crossed, watching. His face was dark, not from Caleb's bond with the old man he'd always despised, but from something deeper. For the first time, he felt displaced, disconnected, like a stranger in the place that had always been his. That evening's dinner was as quiet as it was heavy. Even the clink of utensils sounded sharp. Bill Carter sat at the head of the table, his eyes drifting somewhere between the lamp's glow and a world only he could see. Teresa gently served him a slice of toasted cornbread, then glanced toward Wes. Midnight sleeping okay? She asked. Like a child just told their favorite bedtime story, Wes answered, voice soft as smoke. Caleb chuckled. Rhett slammed his spoon onto the table. Storybook? You think this place is some fairy tale? Wes didn't answer. Teresa placed a firm hand on her husband's arm before he could respond. No one at the table knew that, after every dinner, Bo returned to his room and coughed alone into the night. Liver cancer was peeling him away piece by piece, and time was running short to sew what had been torn. The next day, storm clouds gathered early. Dark masses rolled in from the west, dragging thunder like war drums behind them. By 3 p.m., the ranch alarm rang out from the barn. One of the stall doors had been kicked wide open. Midnight's out, a hand shouted. No way. Caleb ran out. He's used to the place now. Where's Wes? Bo demanded. He left at sunrise to check the fencing in the lower pasture, Teresa answered. Rhett's breathing quickened. I'll find him. I'm coming too, Caleb said, grabbing his raincoat and flashlight. No, Rhett barked. You stay put. Caleb met his father's eyes. If you still see me as a Morgan, don't stop me from doing what's right. They both mounted and rode into the storm, across flooded ground and through wind that tore the words from their mouths. Down in the southern bend of Mustang Hollow near a dip in the land, Caleb spotted it first. Midnight, like a phantom in the fog. The horse was trembling and wild-eyed, not from thunder, but because barbed wire had wrapped around its leg during an escape attempt. He's hurt, Caleb yelled, dismounting. Wait, a voice called out. Wes emerged from the tree line, his coat soaked and heavy with mud. Don't go near him yet, he's in pain. Wes approached slowly, each step sinking into the ground like it pressed into Midnight's soul. He extended his hand. Son, it's me. I'm right here. Midnight let out a soft whimper, then, unbelievably, lowered one knee, as if waiting for that familiar hand to meet its brow. Caleb stood still, stunned. Rhett watched from a distance, his face unreadable. See that? Caleb said, turning to him. No rope, no reins, just a voice. They led Midnight back through the storm, tended to his injury, and for the first time in years, Wes and Rhett sat in the same room without either one walking out. That night, in his private room, Bo opened a small brown cedar box. Inside was a letter he had never delivered. Wes, I've held on to this too long, but you deserve to know. Rhett is your son, and Caleb, he's the gift I never deserved to keep. Bo exhaled, coughed again, and folded the letter shut. The lamp on his desk cast a dim reflection in the mirror, where he saw a man old, pale, but, for the first time, at peace. At first light, Caleb was already up, carrying a water pail past Midnight's stall. The black horse stood chewing hay slowly, its eyes still a little heavy from the fever it fought through the night. Caleb gently stroked its muzzle, then leaned quietly against the rail, eyes drifting toward the tree line, where Wes Turner often wandered at dawn, as if speaking to something no one else could hear. Inside the ranch house, Teresa brewed coffee by hand. No machines, just as she'd done since her girlhood days, on her parents' cattle spread. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with morning pine and cool dew, making the house feel warmer than usual. Bo sat in his armchair, holding the letter he'd written but never delivered to Rhett. Every time he came close to handing it over, his chest clenched with the weight of unspoken decades. Today's the day, Teresa said softly, placing a steaming cup beside him. He needs to know, and I can't keep this in anymore. Bo nodded slowly, rising to his feet. The paper in his hand trembled just slightly. Meanwhile, Rhett was out checking the north fence line when Caleb rode up on Midnight. What are you doing with him? Rhett asked warily. Just a quick ride, Caleb said with a soft grin. Don't worry, I'm not about to risk my neck. Rhett said nothing, watching as the horse and boy moved off down the field. There was something in Caleb's posture, a quiet confidence that Rhett had never seen before. He'd been a father for years, but for the first time he saw his son as a man, and himself as something smaller. That afternoon, when Rhett returned to the house, Bo and Teresa were waiting in the sitting room. What's going on? He asked, guarded. Teresa stood, handing him an old photograph. A young man with sandy blonde hair holding a newborn baby. The baby was him. This is your real father, Rhett, she said. Not Bo, Wes. The room fell still as if time itself had gone silent. You're kidding, Rhett said, his voice a low snarl. Wes? That man? The disgrace of the panhandle? The one who made my mother cry for half her life? That's why I stayed silent all these years, Teresa said, her voice shaking but steady. I was afraid you'd carry shame, afraid you'd lose your self-worth, but you're a father now. You deserve the truth. Bo placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. I never regretted raising you, but I won't die with this secret rotting between us. Rhett stood frozen, fists clenched. So everything I believed was a lie? All of it? The love, the legacy, just performance? No, Bo said calmly. It was love that made me keep it hidden, but now you have to face it, like a man. That evening, Rhett said nothing. He simply walked out to the stables, where Wes was feeding Midnight by hand. So, you're the one who left? The one who turned my mother into a ghost? Rhett said, stepping into the dim light. Wes turned slowly, his eyes steady. I didn't leave. I was pushed out before I even knew I had a son. And now you come back thinking you're… What? A hero? Wes exhaled, quiet. I don't think I'm anything. I only wanted to see my son's face once, before the man who raised him was gone. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. Rhett let out a bitter laugh. You want proof that I carry your blood? Fine, show me. Tame this horse in front of me. Prove it. Wes didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Caleb, who had been there the whole time, quietly observing. You do it, Wes said, handing over the lead rope. If there's anything worth proving, let the horse be the one to say it. Caleb took a deep breath, tightened his grip, and stepped forward. Midnight stood still. When Caleb raised his hand to its brow, the stallion slowly bent one knee, then lowered its head into the boy's chest. No words were spoken. Rhett turned away, but one hand pressed against his own chest, where something soft and old began to melt. He walked out without another word, leaving behind a truth that no longer needed explaining. That day, the wind swept across the prairie, not with the bite of mockery or pride, but with the quiet warmth of awakening. It was a calm June morning, and the Texas sky stretched clear and blue like a still lake. But the air around Mustang Hollow hung heavy. Just as sunlight crept across the eucalyptus grove to the east, the chapel bell on the hill rang out. 7 slow, sorrowful tolls like hoofbeats echoing for a horse that would ride no more. Bo Carter, ranch owner, legacy bearer, father by blood or not, had passed at dawn. No hospitals, no noise, just Teresa by his side, her hand wrapped around his as it went cold. He left behind no estate battles, no grand declarations, only a cedar box with a brass clasp, sealed and labeled, for Wes Turner. Wes sat alone on the back porch of the stable, the air still thick with last night's rain. He opened the box slowly, revealing a handwritten letter, Bo's script, shaky but firm. I've held your place long enough, Wes. Now your true son is ready. This ranch and everything it stands for belongs to him. Wes folded the letter quietly. No tears fell, but his hands, leathered and worn from a lifetime of reins and rope, trembled like a greenhorn's. At the small memorial behind the main house, something unexpected happened. Rhett Morgan, once fierce, once angry, was the first to lay a wreath. He said nothing. He bowed, then placed a fistful of dry prairie grass atop the fresh stone that bore Bo Carter's name. Then, in a silence thick as dusk, Rhett turned to Wes and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I did." The words were gravelly, raw but real. Teresa brought a hand to her mouth. Caleb stood frozen, heart pounding with something he couldn't name. Some reconciliations don't require long speeches. Some redemptions aren't earned through penance, but through the courage to simply say what had never been said. In the weeks that followed, Mustang Hollow changed. Caleb officially took over the ranch, but with a new spirit. Gone were the performative wranglings and profit-first philosophies. The ranch became a place of healing, a sanctuary where troubled youth could come to learn from the horses, to listen, to slow down, to reconnect. Just as Wes once said, you don't have to conquer a horse, just understand it. Midnight, once feared, once untouchable, became the ranch's beating heart. Every morning, Caleb would saddle him and ride across the fields, past the creek, along the white fences that Wes and Bo had once built by hand. And Wes, though more hunched, hands shakier, never missed a day on his weathered porch seat. He no longer trained, no longer commanded. He just watched, like a quiet firekeeper tending to a generation that no longer needed his rope, only his presence. One crisp autumn afternoon, Caleb asked, "Grandpa Wes, why didn't you just stay away forever? Why come back?" Wes smiled, eyes squinting toward the horizon. "Because I knew there were horses out there that needed a voice they weren't afraid of. And sometimes, people need that too." Caleb nodded, saying nothing. A breeze drifted through the corral, carrying with it the scent of old leather, warm hay, and something deeper. Memory. The kind you don't remember with your head, but with your chest. Memories that had once rotted in the old stalls now came alive again, through forgiveness, through quiet steps, through the most forgotten bond of all, family. On the restored wooden sign at the ranch gate, the letters were hand-carved deep, Mustang Hollow, where every soul is meant to be understood, not broken. And in the corner of the stable, where Caleb placed Wes's chair each afternoon, hung a small chalkboard, refreshed daily with just one phrase. They looked down on the old Mustang trainer, but he taught them a lesson they'd never forget. If you believe time can teach lessons youth never understands, comment 1 below. If you believe patience and empathy can heal even the wildest soul, comment 0. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories for more journeys where hearts speak louder than words. We'll see you next time, where another soul and another story awaits.